I want to start with some clips of conversations with Russians in the Moscow region. So these are people who, grew up in Russian society, are Russian, native Russians, and they've existed in the May 9th Victory Day spectacle for much of their adult life, especially when you talk about these. And so they're being told in this video how at today's May 9th parade, there is not going to be any tanks, there's not going to be any armored vehicles, there's not going to be any military equipment. It is just going to be a military parade of marching soldiers. Putin will likely make a speech, and while this is not mentioned here, there will not be many high-profile visiting diplomats. At tomorrow's parade, the only people that are supposed to visit is Fico, the leader of Slovakia, but though he has now said he's not going to go to the parade, he is instead just going to have a private meeting with Putin. You have the leader of Cambodia, the leader of Belarus, I think a state head from Malaysia, and I think that's it. I think that's literally. I think there might be one other name that I'm missing. But if you were to compare this with, say, the Victory Day parade 16 years ago, it's not even comparable. It's not even comparable, especially when you had the Ukrainians participating in past Victory Day parades. So they're being told that there's not going to be any military equipment, where Victory Day parades, they were usually look at our splendor, look at our power, look at what we fought for to defeat, Nazi Germany, but also militarism. Look at our big tank. Look at our big missile. Look at our big X, Y, and Z. It helped display power. And so by removing that, you remove that display of power, which is also a reassurance to the Russian public. And I think one way to show how that's a reassurance to the Russian public is how these Russians reacted to being told that today's in Ukraine, today's May 9th parade is going to be without any vehicles and without that reassurance. Not too excited about it. There will be no military equipment at the May 9th parade. How do you feel about that? It's quite sad, because our fathers and grandfathers' military equipment represents the national treasures of our country to them. So there was a time when tanks fought for us, and now there is no military equipment. So, for example, my father finds it very distressing. He was genuinely quite saddened by it. He wanted to show his daughters, my younger sisters, at least the tanks. That idea of this military equipment is their shared history, their inherited history. I could say maybe the older equipment. I could imagine that, but I don't know how many T-72s you call your legacy. T-34s maybe. Well, that's nothing terrible. The parade will still take place. Everything will be fine. Let the equipment rest. It's stationed where it's needed more. Why drag it around? It burns expensive fuel. I think May 9th is, in general, a rather confusing event. In what sense? In a literal sense. The country is suffering defeat on all fronts. So what are they celebrating? Victory in the Great Patriotic War? I don't really know how to phrase this. Maybe Russia is doing something wrong. Why do you think that? Well, if we can't celebrate this wonderful holiday the way we want to, and the way we used to, then it was a symbol. Vladimir came up with the idea of celebrating it on a large scale. And something went wrong. Perhaps something needs to be fixed at the root. For safety reasons. Is someone actually going to be at risk or something? Well, the official statement sounded like it was due to the activity of the Kiev terrorist regime. Well, okay, but people will still be there. Yes. If it's about terrorism, I just don't understand. At most, 1 or 2 tanks could be damaged there. It's not like an atomic bomb is going to be dropped. What do you mean? Seriously? There won't be one. Then why was Red Square
целью?
closed?
А где она
For
будет
what purpose?
проезжать?
And where will it
Это
take
будет очень
place?
неудобный
Nowhere.
вопрос.
So then
Короче,
what will
будет,
this...
получается...
Oh gosh, he quite quick. So then what will actually happen on May 9th? That's the question.
Понимаю вопрос. Короче, будет,
So in short,
получается,
it will
только
just be a march of
я так
people,
понимаю. Ну,
I
типа,
suppose, and there
вскоре.
won't be any
А, техники
military
не будет.
equipment.
Ну да, это опасно.
Well, yes, it's
В смысле,
dangerous.
для кого
What do you
опасно?
mean? Dangerous for whom? It's gonna happen here anyway. If we're armed, then who exactly would it be
А она
dangerous
тихо будет
for?
проходить. В смысле, если мы заряжены, для кого она опасна будет?
It's actually a good point. Like, I mean, yeah, I think a military vehicle is a bigger target, but if you're marching in single file lines, row after row of soldier, like, yeah, a bomb will kill that all the same. So this seemed to show a general vibe shift over the idea that if the Russians cannot produce military equipment for the parade, either because they're at risk of being attacked or they're facing shortages all across the entirety of their armor corps, both of which is true, then it's going to have a negative impact. And so the discussion, I mean, is going to have a negative impact on morale. It's going to create a negative image. I don't think that this Victory Day parade is going to be able to do much to rally around the flag, get the Russian people together once more, to push on towards another 1, 2, 3 years of war. I don't think that it's going to have that effect. Going on 5 years now, they've had 4 Victory Day parades under full-scale conditions. This is the first one where they're removing the tanks and they're being direct about the idea that they're removing the tanks due to the threat of, they say, terror attack. But if you have a military parade and someone bombs that military parade and they target just the military and they don't hit any civilians, that is 100% legitimate. That's 100% legitimate. Hell, there's even a scenario for being said that while, of course, each nation has to put in due diligence to protect civilian populations, that even if there were civilian casualties, as long as that due diligence could be proven, it still would not count as either terrorism, and it still would not count as, say, necessarily a war crime. There could be a scenario where if you're just attacking the parade randomly and you're just like throwing drones into the crowd, throwing drones into the parade, throwing drones at government buildings, where you could maybe more accurately describe it in that manner. But the Ukrainians did not say that they wanted to bomb the crowds. The Ukrainians did not say that they even wanted to bomb government buildings. The Ukrainians simply just kind of vaguely gestured towards the fact that the Russians around Victory Day are not necessarily safe, that they have the ability, due to the mass expansion of long-range drone attacks, that they have been able to increase their capacity to bring destruction to all these different areas deep inside of Russia, but also Moscow. Moscow is in range, not because the United States gave them a weapon, not because some Western power gave them the weapon, but because the Ukrainians have been resisting for so long, they were able to build the weapons themselves, expand the technology, evolve the technology, and then throw it at Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, throw it at Russia's military production, and now have the specter of it being thrown at their military parade, haunting the Russians. And this has led to some very interesting back and forths around the possibility of an attack on this parade. So recently, if you were listening to Zelensky talk about this, he was saying openly, hey guys, I think it would be wise if you did not go to this parade. He would say this to foreign leaders. He would say this to a whole bunch of people. But the idea was, hello, it would not be wise for you to go there because who knows what we're going to do? Who knows what's going to happen? And on the outskirts of the big meeting in Yerevan in Armenia, where the Ukrainians met Fico as well as the Georgian president, it was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky talking to the Slovak leader that actually led the Slovak leader to say, I'm not going to that parade. And that only added to the specter more, which concerned the Russians. And it should concern the Russians. It should really scare the Russians. I mean, you guys got to understand. Let me bring up the Victory Day parade up for a second. Here's an old Victory Day parade. Okay, just so we have something on screen, just so you can see. So back in the day, you get all these different military delegations from foreign countries. You get all these different foreign leader. You see this old one as Xi Jinping. There's Nicolas Maduro, who's currently in prison in the United States. And so you're not getting the leadership. You're not getting them there. So you're not getting the propaganda effect from that. You don't have the military equipment there. So you're not getting the effect from that. But if the parade itself was targeted, what type of message would that send? I mean, the fact that they don't have their military equipment there already sends the message that they are not secure, that they cannot defend all of Russia, and in fact, they can't even defend Moscow from an air attack. The fact that now they say that it's due to the activities of the terrorist regime. I think it's multiple factors. I think that there is a possibility that Ukraine throws a bunch of stuff at Moscow and the vast majority of it gets taken down, and that the actual risk to this equipment might actually be somewhat minimal, as the Ukrainians might want to concentrate on different targets. And there's going to be a lot more marching soldiers than there is going to be moving equipment due to the shortages that the Russians have in this military equipment. They need it elsewhere. So I think that there's multiple factors leading to that loss of military equipment, but it has been translated to the Russian public as due to this threat from Ukraine, which means they're saying we cannot protect you necessarily from this. We can't protect our own equipment from this. And while not everyone will conclude that means you can't protect us, some people will. Because if you cannot celebrate the Victory Day parade that Putin himself made such a staple in the modern Russian context, if you cannot celebrate that without being attacked or under risk of attack, then how safe are you? So I think that by this going the way it has, and by the way Zelensky has talked about it and warned about it and has gotten a real angry response from the Russians. I was watching Russian state TV talking about what they would do if the Ukrainians bombed the Victory Day parade, and they were threatening to bomb everything and everyone, going so far as to threatening to bomb foreign embassies that included the Japanese embassy. Why the Japanese embassy would be bombed, I don't know. But they were really trying to find whatever means they could to threaten just the most overwhelming retaliation. Oh, that guy was losing his cap. You saw that guy? I saw that. You can't hide that from me. You can't hide that from me. I saw that, dude. I can't go back and rewind it, but I saw him stumble on his hat. So if it was attacked after they had already come out and like threw question marks over the idea that they can protect the Victory Day parade, what type of impact would that have on Russian society? I don't think the direct military impact would be that significant. I think that it might mean more air defense systems move to Moscow. I think that would probably be the largest direct military impact of this. And of course, any direct military casualties, soldiers killed while marching, etc., etc. But for this to take place while the whole country is watching, while it's being live streamed, while there's people in the crowd, it'll travel by word of mouth, it'll travel by social media, and in this moment, to have this happen when they've already set the stage that there's going to be problems, that would be politically devastating. That would be, for propaganda purposes, showing Russia to be weaker than the general public might think. And then if you're the general public and you were told, well, we can't bring the equipment out because the Ukrainians might attack, and then the Ukrainians actually do it and they pull something off, you're going to be asking, I was told that the end of this war is right around the corner, that, that it was going to be short, then it wasn't short, but don't worry, we'll win eventually anyway. Now we're going on 5 years, and the Ukrainians are bombing us in Moscow, bombing the Victory Day parade, attack. God damn, what's happening? What's going on? I don't feel safe. I don't feel secure. Putin was elected off of 2 mandates: economic stability and also just general stability. The economic stability is grinding itself down. This would be the ultimate symbol, a massive drone attack on a parade like this, of a lack of general stability. And I think that would be the biggest motivator to get the Ukrainians to strike this. Yes, you might kill some marching soldiers. Yes, you might disable one piece of military equipment there or here or anywhere. That that downstream effect on the war will be incomparable to the propaganda effect of the war, especially if people see it happen live and the Russians are ineffective at stopping the traveling of word of mouth. The Russians might try to sell it in a different way. They would likely sell it with a type of spin that, hey, you know, this is a terror attack and we're defending against the terror attack. And so we must all unite together against terrorism and sign up for the military today. I assume that the Russians would try to make the best they could of a bad situation, but an inability to make Russia look secure, the Kursk invasion to this is the type of moments that make people question the stability of the government. And what are we going to do? Is this feasible? Is this working? So some might say that a strike like this on a massive event like the Victory Day Parade could increase Russian support for the war. That would only be true if the drones all just slam into the crowd and they kill hundreds of civilians, and then you've got something that's actually somewhat reminiscent of the Moscow Mall attack when it comes to civilian impact, civilian death. There's Lula da Silva. And you have something, you know, something that could communicate that there has been some great atrocity committed against the Russian people that must be remedied. Outside of that outcome, the result of a Ukrainian attack on the Victory Day Parade, propaganda-wise, would be absolutely devastating. And so that's why the Russians have been so nervous. That's why the Russians have threatened so many attacks against the Ukrainians and so many retaliations. That's why the Russians went to Donald Trump and essentially asked him to go to the Ukrainians and make them have a ceasefire. The Ukrainians offered a ceasefire on the 6th. A Ukrainian school was bombed in Sumy soon after. Dozens of civilians died in strikes across the country. They wanted a longer ceasefire from the 6th through Victory Day so they could show that it was a more general ceasefire and was not a ceasefire specifically attuned just to make the Russians feel secure, just to protect Russia's propaganda efforts, just to protect their military marches where they're going to try to brag about their victories in Ukraine and recruit more Russians to go fight and kill Ukrainians. So they wanted a ceasefire that went from the 6th. Well, the Russians obviously did not respect that ceasefire, but Donald Trump still listened to Vladimir Putin and requested a ceasefire of the Ukrainians. And we know that because we have reporting that essentially Trump came out and declared a 3-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Now on May 8th, not when Ukraine asked for it before, not when Ukraine didn't want its schools bombed, not when Ukraine didn't want dozens of civilians killed, not when Ukraine made the offer before that would have extended through Victory Day and they ignored it and bombed Ukraine because Ukraine demanding a ceasefire is ridiculous. Russia demanding a ceasefire is mandatory, and that is how Donald Trump treated it. He went to the Ukrainians after talking to Putin and essentially requested of them, please have a Victory Day ceasefire. Please allow the Russians to have their big parade so Putin can help shore up his support base and help continue to push out propaganda for the war. And so we can prevent a terrible escalation. Because, you know, it'd be really terrible if national capitals got bombed in this war. Wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be really terrible if one day Kiev got bombed? My God. So obviously, this is something that had to be avoided. And so he went to the Ukrainians and he pushed and he pushed and he pushed and said, please don't do a strike. Please don't do a strike. And then the president's office came out and they said, fine. About the parade in Moscow, taking into account the numerous requests for humanitarian purposes outlined in the negotiations with the American side on May 8th, 2026, I resolved, well, number one, I will allow a parade to be held on May 9th, 2026 in the city of Moscow, the Russian Federation. Man. How bizarre is that? Could you imagine 3 days into this war, President Zelensky issuing a decree where I will allow the Victory Day Parade to take place? I will allow the Russians to have their parade. There is a more extended, longer version of the statement. We can read that now. For the duration of the parade from 10 a.m. Kiev time on May 9th, the territorial square of Red Square should be excluded from plans for the use of Ukrainian weapons. And then he literally shows the coordinates. Here's the coordinates. If you don't want to get bombed, here's where you want to stand. Number 2, the decree shall enter into force on the day of its signing. So that means today? Well, yesterday. But that means right now, as of right now, it's May 9th in Ukraine. The ceasefire is on. But if you read what Zelensky said here, again, they didn't accept his earlier offer of a ceasefire. I will allow a parade to be held for the duration of the parade from 10 a.m. Kiev time. The territorial square of Red Square will be excluded from plans. So he's not saying we won't bomb oil refineries. He's not saying we won't bomb factories. He's saying we will specifically spare your parade. The Russians did not spare Ukraine's schools or hospitals or civilian infrastructure, but Trump wants Ukraine to spare the parade, and due to the fact that the Russians would likely respond very aggressively with even more disregard than usual towards civilian casualties on the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainians seemingly have made the determination that it's probably better for both relationships with the United States and just to what their general interests are to let it be. Mind you, the impact on Russian society is all speculative. We could think that if Russian society saw this, they would all collectively say, my gosh, we're not safe. Many of them, or at least some of them for sure, would have to have this thought passing through their head if they, had 2 brain cells to rub together. I mean, this is wild to me. Did we get anything similar for the Ukrainian side? Did we ever get Trump calling Putin and then coming away with a ceasefire for the Ukrainian side? We didn't get that for a few days ago. Why do we get that now? Is that Trump thought that this was too escalatory? Is this Trump doing a favor for Putin? Is this Trump thinking that this will somehow derail his already non-existent peace negotiations? I think really it could be any of the above. Maybe he doesn't want it in the headlines that Ukraine is bombing, their Victory Day parade, making Ukraine look strong, undermining their argument, while also bringing the war back into the headlines when Donald Trump hasn't even been able to manage his operation, what you just called it, Operation Freedom, which lasted a day, or any of his back and forth with the Iranians right now. Wouldn't other targets be more vulnerable due to AA systems moved to Moscow center? Let's hope they set ablaze on many other targets. That's another thing. Like, we're talking about propaganda value here. We're talking about, in principle, how the Russians can bomb whatever they want in Ukraine, but the Ukrainians cannot bomb the parade that is specifically tied to the image of Vladimir Putin and how he is viewed in Russia, because you can't be a man like Putin and lose wars. That's just, you don't survive losing wars as a man like Putin. It didn't work for the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. It did not work for World War I. And it would not work here as well. So I think that there is a value in the targeting of the propaganda machine of the Victory Day parade. I think there's definitely a value there. But I also do think that there is a value in many other targets. There's value in export terminals. There's value in bombing oil refineries or pumps or the infrastructure that moves it from point A to point B, or air defense systems. The Ukrainians are continuously trying to grind down Russian air defense, or ammunition storage, or any other number of locations that they could target instead, as regardless of what the Ukrainians said here, the Russians are going to move air defense systems to protect the Victory Day parade, because that has to do with Putin's image, and there is no more valuable strategic asset in the Russian Federation, at least thought of by those in Moscow, than Putin's image. So I think that ultimately, yes, restricting themselves from striking the parade after what Russia has done to Ukraine might feel like a double standard, because it is a double standard. yes, you're giving up a certain propaganda victory here by not doing this attack. But on the other hand, that doesn't say anything about any of the other targets that could be attacked on this day. And if it's Victory Day parade and you're having a celebration of victory while other parts of the country are getting bombed, especially those who wouldn't be showing up to Victory Day to begin with, as the vast majority of Russians do not show up to Victory Day parade, then they can still have an impact while abiding by Trump's terms for his 72-hour ceasefire, which he was only able to achieve when it protected Russian interests, which does show the really lack of strength in Trump's negotiating policy strategy. I'm pleased to announce that there will be a 3-day ceasefire